Hello there, and welcome to Night Souls. I'm so glad you found your way here. In today's episode, we're stepping away from the deep woods and into a place that should be safe, a place of laughter and games, the playground. But beneath the bright colors and the sound of swinging chains, some children have encountered things they can never forget. These are their stories, told in their own words. But before we begin, please subscribe, like the video, and share it with your friends and family. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment and let me know. Thank you all so much for your support. It means a lot to me. Now, let's get started. My name is Chloe Madison, and my childhood bedroom window was a framed painting of the ordinary. It looked out over our modest backyard, a chain-link fence, and beyond that, the sprawling, moonlit emptiness of Oakwood Elementary's playground. For most of my life, it was a comforting vista. The silent slide was a silver tongue in the dark. The motionless swings were sleeping pendulums. It was a landscape of paused potential, waiting for the morning bell to bring it back to life. That all changed the summer I turned 12, when I learned that the playground didn't sleep. It just changed players. It was late July 2006. The air conditioning in our house was fighting a losing battle against the Midwest humidity, and my window was open. The sounds of crickets and distant traffic drifting in like a lullaby. I was a light sleeper, prone to waking in the deep, silent hours between midnight and 3. I'd often lie there, watching the moon trace its path across the floor, counting the cracks in my ceiling. On this particular night, a sound pulled me from a dreamless sleep. Not a loud sound, a rhythmic metallic whine, a sound I knew intimately from 1,000 recesses. It was the sound of the roundabout. We called it the merry-go-round, though there was nothing merry about it. It was a brutal circle of pitted steel, rust bleeding from its bolts, with 6 metal bars for kids to hold on to. Pushing it was a test of strength. Stopping it was an act of collective will. Its central spindle shrieked like a tormented animal when it spun, a sound that could carry across the entire school grounds. And it was spinning now. I sat up in bed, my heart giving a single hard thump. That was impossible. The playground was locked at dusk. There was no one out there. I crept out of bed and padded to the window, the cool wooden floorboards smooth beneath my bare feet. The moon was nearly full, casting a sharp, blue-white light that bleached the color from the world. The playground was a study in monochrome, and there it was. The roundabout. It was spinning at a terrifying speed, a blur of steel and shadow. My breath fogged the glass. I rubbed it clear with the heel of my hand, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. A freak wind? A group of older kids who had climbed the fence? Then I saw the riders. They were silhouettes, black cutouts against the slightly less black night. They were small. Children. They sat perfectly still on the spinning platform, their backs straight, their hands gripping the metal bars. They weren't whooping or laughing. They weren't leaning into the curve or fighting the centrifugal force. They were rigid, inert, like dolls placed on a turntable. And they were utterly silent. The only sound was the hellish shrieking of the metal spindle, a sound that should have been deafening at this distance, but which seemed oddly contained as if it were happening inside a glass jar. I couldn't hear their laughter, their shouts, not even the rush of wind, just that relentless metallic whine. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This was wrong. This was deeply, profoundly wrong. I counted the figures. 6, 1 for each bar. The roundabout was at full capacity, a silent, spinning carousel of shadows. I did what any rational child would do. I ran to my parents' room. "Mom," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Dad, there are kids in the playground." My dad groaned, rolling over. "Go back to bed, Chloe. It's a dream." "It's not. They're on the roundabout. It's spinning really fast." My mom sat up, her voice thick with sleep. Honey, it's the middle of the night. It's probably just the big kids from the high school. They're not big kids, I insisted, my voice trembling. They're little, and they're not moving. With a sigh of exasperation, my dad swung his legs out of bed. Fine, let's have a look. He followed me back to my room, his gait heavy with sleep. He stood beside me at the window, squinting out into the darkness. The roundabout was still spinning, a dark vortex in the moonlit yard. I don't see anything, sweetie, he said, his voice softening. It's just a trick of the shadows. The moon is very bright. But, look, he interrupted, pointing. See, it's not moving. I stared. He was right. The roundabout was perfectly still. The shrieking had stopped. The silhouettes were gone. The playground was empty and silent once more, as if the last 5 minutes had never happened. It was moving, I whispered, my certainty crumbling under his logical adult gaze. You were dreaming, he said firmly, putting an arm around me. A waking dream. It happens. Now, back to bed. He tucked me in and left, closing my door softly. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. The image of those silent, rigid riders burned into my mind. I knew what I had seen. I hadn't been dreaming. The next night it happened again. The same metallic shriek tore me from my sleep. I didn't go to my parents' window. I knew better. I went to my own. There they were, the 6 shadow children spinning in their silent, terrible circle. I watched, paralyzed, for what felt like an hour, until the first hint of dawn began to bleach the eastern sky. As the darkness receded, the roundabout slowed, and the figures seemed to dissolve, melting back into the shadows from which they came. When the sun finally rose, it was still. This became my secret. Night after night I would wake at the same time and watch the spectral carousel. The fear never lessened, but it was joined by a morbid fascination. Who were they? Why were they here? They never varied their routine. 6 figures, a blinding spin, absolute silence. My days became foggy. I was tired, withdrawn. My parents put it down to a growth spurt, but my best friend, Jessica, noticed. You look like crap, Chloe, she said bluntly one afternoon as we sat on the stationary sun-warmed roundabout. The metal was hot to the touch. I hadn't planned on telling anyone. The words just tumbled out. I told her everything. The midnight spinning, the silent children, the shrieking spindle. Instead of laughing, her face went pale. You see them too? She whispered. My blood ran cold. What? My cousin, she said, her voice low. She used to live in your house. She told me the same story when she was our age. My aunt and uncle thought she was having night terrors. We stared at each other, a shared understanding passing between us. This wasn't a dream. This was a phenomenon. This was real. The breaking point came a week later. The roundabout was spinning faster than I had ever seen it, the shrieking so intense I thought the windows would vibrate out of their frames. And then, one of the silhouettes turned its head. It wasn't a fluid movement. It was a jerky, mechanical pivot. And it wasn't looking around. It was looking directly at my window, directly at me. A pair of eyes, or what should have been eyes, were now 2 pinpricks of faint, phosphorescent green, like dying embers. They held my gaze from across the dark field. I felt a jolt of recognition, of being seen, that was more terrifying than anything I had yet experienced. I was no longer a spectator. I was part of the show. I slammed my window shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the latch. I pulled the blinds and dove under my covers, but I could still hear the faint, insistent whine, and I could still feel those 2 green pinpricks staring through the walls. The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks before. I went to the oldest person I knew who might have answers, Mr. Henderson, the retired groundskeeper who still lived in a small house across from the school. He was in his front yard, watering his roses. I approached him nervously. Mr. Henderson, can I ask you about the school playground? He turned, his kind, wrinkled face breaking into a smile. Sure, Chloe. What about it? The roundabout, I began, choosing my words carefully. Has anything ever happened there? Something bad? The smile vanished from his face. He turned off the hose, the sudden silence feeling heavy. Why do you ask? I couldn't tell him the whole truth. I had a weird dream about it. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes seeming to see right through my lie. He gestured for me to sit on his porch swing. We sat, the chains creaking a companionable rhythm. That roundabout's been there since the 50s, he said, his voice distant. Solid piece of equipment, never broke, not once. He paused. But there was an accident. Winter of '58, bad ice storm. A group of 6 kids, 3rd graders, thought it would be fun to spin it on the ice. They got it going faster than anyone thought possible. The ice, it was like glass. They couldn't stop it. It spun out of control, and the spindle, it heated up from the friction. Glowed red hot, they said. The whole thing just came apart, threw those children clear across the playground. My hand flew to my mouth. Did they? He nodded slowly, his eyes sad. All 6 of them died on impact. It was a terrible, terrible thing. The town almost tore the whole playground down, but in the end they just repaired the roundabout, put the same spindle back in, said it was a tribute. I sat in stunned silence. 6 children, a spinning death, a memorial they were forced to repeat every night for eternity. I thanked Mr. Henderson and walked home in a daze. The mystery was solved, but the horror was amplified. I wasn't seeing ghosts. I was witnessing a memory, a traumatic echo trapped in the metal and the earth. They weren't malevolent. They were trapped, forever reenacting the final terrifying moments of their lives. That night, I didn't close my blinds. When the shrieking started, I went to the window. I watched the 6 shadows spinning in their endless loop. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt a profound, aching pity. I'm sorry, I whispered into the glass. I see you. I know what happened. The roundabout didn't stop. The green pinpricks didn't appear. But for the first time, the relentless shrieking of the spindle seemed to soften, just for a moment, into something that sounded less like a scream and more like a sigh. They're still there. I moved away years ago, but my parents still live in that house. On the rare occasions I visit, I always look out my old bedroom window. The playground has been modernized. The old steel roundabout was finally deemed unsafe and replaced with a safe plastic one that barely moves. But sometimes, on a still moonlit night, if the conditions are just right, I can almost hear it. The faint, ghostly echo of a shrieking spindle, and I see 6 small shadows, forever spinning, forever silent, forever 12 years old. My name is Jake Rollins, and I've carried the memory of what happened in the summer of 1998 like a cold stone in my pocket for 25 years. You touch it from time to time, not because you want to, but because you have to remind yourself that it was real. That you're still real. Everyone has that one childhood summer that defines them, a hazy golden epoch of scraped knees, firefly-lit evenings, and the taste of cheap popsicles. For me, that summer was also the one where I learned that darkness isn't just an absence of light. It's a substance, a presence. It has weight and temperature, and sometimes it breathes. I was 9 years old, all scabby knees and knobby elbows, with a haircut my mom called practical, and I called a bowl. We lived in a sleepy postage-stamp town called Cedar Brook, a place where the most exciting event of the week was the arrival of the bookmobile. My world was small, bordered by Mr. Henderson's orchard to the north and the sprawling, magnificent chaos of Brookside Park to the south. Brookside was the heart of our juvenile universe. It was an old park, even by 1998 standards. The equipment wasn't the safe, colorful plastic and rubber kind you see today. It was built from splintery timber, rust-streaked galvanized steel, and hard, packed earth that offered no forgiveness when you fell. There was a formidable wooden fort with a wonky rope bridge, a set of monkey bars that blistered your hands in July, and a set of 4 swings whose chains would pinch the skin of your fingers if you weren't careful. And then there was the slide. It wasn't just a slide. It was the slide. A colossal tube of corrugated metal, painted a fading, sun-bleached blue, that twisted down from a platform a good 12 feet in the air. It was a rite of passage. The younger kids stuck to the smaller, open-backed slides. The slide was for the veterans, the 9 and up crowd. It was a tunnel into the earth, a journey into darkness, and out again into the light. On a hot day, the metal would bake, and the inside would feel like a furnace, smelling of hot dust and warm, wet dog. But on most days, it was cool and dark, a private sanctuary from the shouting and the sun. The entrance was a perfect dark circle, a mouth that swallowed you whole. You'd sit at the top, your legs dangling into the abyss, gather your courage, and push off. For the first second, you were blind, the world outside vanishing as you were plunged into a roaring, rattling darkness. The sound of your body sliding down the metal was deafening, a thunder that filled the universe. Then, just as suddenly, you'd burst out the bottom, squinting and disoriented, deposited onto the hard ground in a tangle of limbs. It was a tiny death and rebirth every single time. I loved it. The summer of '98 was particularly hot and humid, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and the buzzing of cicadas. It was a Tuesday, I think. The specific day is etched into my memory with unnatural clarity, even if the date itself is fuzzy. I'd been at the park for a couple of hours, engaged in a complex game of tag that spanned the entire park. I was it, and after a long, fruitless chase, I saw my friend Mikey scamper up the ladder to the slide's platform. A perfect trap. There was only one way down. I followed him up, my bare feet slapping on the warm wood. I could see Mikey's grinning face as he positioned himself at the top. "You'll never get me, Rollins," he yelled, and then he was gone, his whoop echoing for a second before being swallowed by the tube. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the tunnel right after him, eager to catch him at the bottom. The moment I crossed the threshold, something changed. It's difficult to describe, but it was immediate and visceral. The first thing I noticed was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. The roaring, rattling cacophony that always accompanied the descent was gone. It was as if someone had stuffed cotton wool in my ears. My own slide was silent, a ghostly, frictionless glide. The shouts and laughter of the other kids in the park, which should have been a muffled backdrop, vanished completely. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, a profound silence that pressed in on my eardrums. The second thing was the temperature. The slide was always cool, but this was different. This was a deep, damp cold that seeped through my shorts and t-shirt and settled into my bones. It was the cold of a cellar in winter, a clammy, unwelcome chill. And then came the smell. It cut through the familiar scent of hot metal and dust. It was a thick, organic odor of wet earth, of rotten leaves, and underneath it all a faint, coppery tang like a handful of old pennies. It was the smell of something dead and decaying. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the base of my spine. This was all wrong. My 9-year-old brain, which understood the simple, predictable physics of a playground slide, was short-circuiting. I was halfway down, I figured, suspended in this silent, freezing, stinking tube. I wanted to scream, to break with my hands and feet, but I was paralyzed, sliding forward as if on a greased track. That's when I felt it. There was something in the slide with me. The space inside was tight, barely wide enough for a child. There was no room for another person. But this wasn't a person. My head was about level with the curve of the tube, and I felt something brush against my hair. It was a sensation of cold, wet weight, like a sack of wet leaves or a sopping wet overcoat. I froze, my body rigid. I tried to look up, but in the absolute darkness I could see nothing. I could only feel. The thing shifted. It was pressed against the ceiling of the slide, and it was moving, slowly, deliberately down the tube with me. Or I was moving with it. We were traveling together in that silent, dark space. I could feel its presence hovering just inches above my face. I could feel a dreadful rhythmic pressure in the air. It was breathing, slow, deep, rattling breaths that I felt more than heard, a vibration in the frigid air. Then, the whisper. It didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to emanate from the metal itself, from the cold air, from inside my own head. It was a dry, rasping sound, the sound of dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was a voice, but one stripped of all humanity, all warmth, all life. It whispered my name. Jaka. It drew the single syllable out, savoring it, turning my name into something alien and horrifying. That broke the paralysis. A sound tore from my throat, a raw, primal scream that was instantly absorbed by the suffocating silence. I flung my hands and feet out, scraping my skin raw against the corrugated metal, trying to slow myself down, to get away from the cold, breathing weight above me. Suddenly the world exploded back into existence. Sound and light and heat crashed over me like a wave. The roaring of the slide returned. The shouts of the other kids assaulted my ears, and the bright late afternoon sun blinded me. I shot out of the bottom of the slide like a cannonball, tumbling head over heels onto the hard-packed dirt. I lay there for a moment, gasping, the wind knocked out of me. The heat of the day felt like a physical blow after the deep cold of the tube. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. Mikey was standing over me, his face a mask of confusion. "Jake, you okay? Why'd you scream like that?" I scrambled to my feet, my eyes locked on the dark, circular mouth of the slide. It looked normal, just a dark hole, but I knew what was in there. There's something in the slide," I stammered, my voice trembling. Mikey peered up at it. "What? Like a bee's nest? Did you get stung?" "No. It's a thing. A cold thing. It talked to me." Mikey, ever the pragmatist, just shrugged. "You probably just got dizzy. Want to go on the swings?" I didn't go near the slide for the rest of the day. I sat on a bench, shaking, watching the other kids run in and out of its mouth without a care in the world. None of them seemed to notice anything wrong. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the park. The blue tube of the slide now looked like a bruised vein against the darkening green of the trees. When my mom came to pick me up, I was silent in the car. "Did you have fun, honey?" she asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I just nodded, staring out the window. How could I possibly explain? I went down the slide, Mom, and it was cold and quiet, and a sack of wet leaves whispered my name. She'd think I had a fever. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that silent, freezing tube, feeling that cold weight above me, hearing that rasping whisper. I slept with the lights on. The next day I refused to go to the park. I told my mom I didn't feel well. She felt my forehead and said I seemed fine, but let me stay home. I spent the day in my room, reading comic books and trying to forget. But the memory was a stain. A week passed. The terror began to fade, replaced by a dull, persistent dread. The other kids asked why I wasn't going on the slide anymore. I made up excuses. It was too hot. It was for babies. I'd hurt my knee. Mikey had forgotten all about my episode. Life for everyone else went on. But the park was the only real place to play. Eventually, the pull of freedom overcame the push of fear. I went back. I played on the fort, the swings, the monkey bars. I gave the slide a wide berth, treating it like a sleeping predator. I'd see other kids go down it, laughing and shouting, and a part of me wondered if I had just imagined it all. Maybe it was a weird dizzy spell, A panic attack, though I didn't know that term then. Then, one afternoon, a new kid named Timmy went down the slide. He was a few years younger than me, maybe 6 or 7. He went in laughing. He came out screaming. Not a playful shriek, but a raw, terrified wail that cut through the park's ambient noise. He scrambled out of the bottom, his face pale and streaked with tears, and ran to his older sister, babbling about a cold man in the slide. My blood ran cold. I hadn't imagined it. A small crowd gathered around Timmy. His sister was trying to calm him down. "There's no such thing, Timmy. You just got scared." But I knew. I walked over, my heart pounding. "What did he look like?" I asked, my voice quiet. Timmy looked at me, his eyes wide with shared terror. I didn't see him. It was dark, but he was cold. And he smelled bad. Like dirt. That was the moment the childhood nightmare solidified into something real and shared. We had a secret, Timmy and I, a terrible knowledge that the other kids couldn't comprehend. The slide was no longer just a piece of playground equipment. It was haunted. After that, I started investigating, not in a brave, heroic way, but in the furtive, obsessive way of a child trying to understand a monster under his bed. I started asking questions. I'd linger near the benches where the older folks sometimes sat, feeding the pigeons. I became a student of the slide's history. One day I struck gold. I was sitting on a bench next to old Mr. Abernathy, a man in his 80s who had lived in Cedar Brook his whole life. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands gnarled but steady. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, my voice hesitant. He grunted, not looking up from his whittling. "That big blue slide. Has it always been here?" "Nope," he said, shaving off a curl of wood. "Put that in. Must have been 65 or 66. Part of a big park renovation. The Kiwanis Club paid for it." My heart sank a little. It wasn't ancient. "Oh, has anything ever happened on it? Anything bad?" He paused his whittling and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were a pale, watery blue. "Why do you ask, son?" I couldn't tell him the truth. Just curious. He looked back at his wood, but he was silent for a long time. The only sound was the shh of his knife. "Winter of 67, he said finally, his voice low. "Bad one, lots of snow, cold enough to freeze the spit in your mouth." He took a deep breath. "Fella, homeless fella. Name was Walter, I think. Walter Pike. Used to sleep in the park sometimes. Kind, harmless soul, just down on his luck." He fell silent again, and I didn't dare speak. "They found him in the spring," Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice barely a whisper. "After the big thaw, curled up inside that slide. Trying to get out of the snow and the wind, I suppose. Froze to death in there, solid as a rock. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The hot summer day suddenly felt frigid. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying final clarity. The deep, unnatural cold. The smell of wet earth and decay. The smell of a body left to the elements. The feeling of a heavy, cold weight. He hadn't been pressed against the ceiling. He had been curled up, frozen, and my head had brushed against his frozen, cloth-clad back. But the whisper... Did he have a raspy voice? I asked, my own voice trembling. Mr. Abernathy gave a sad, dry chuckle. "Couldn't tell you, son. Never heard him speak much. But the cold, they said his lungs were full of fluid. Pneumonia, probably. Would have made it hard to breathe. Would have sounded like a real bad rattle. A real bad rattle." The breathing I felt. The rasping whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was the death rattle of a frozen, dying man, a sound etched into the very metal of the slide, a psychic scar on a place that had witnessed profound suffering and loneliness. He hadn't been saying my name. He had been gasping, rattling, breathing his last. and my terrified, childish mind had shaped that awful sound into the only word that made sense to it in that context of direct, personal terror. My own. Walter Pike hadn't been trying to scare me. He was just still there, trapped in his final, cold, dark moment, repeating it for all eternity. And I, a 9-year-old boy, had slid right through his death. I never went down the slide again. I couldn't even look at it without seeing the ghost of that poor, frozen man. The park lost its magic for me. The laughter began to sound hollow. The games felt trivial. I had been shown the abyss that lurked just beneath the surface of my safe, small world. A few years later, the town council, citing safety concerns, tore down the old timber fort and the metal slide. They installed bright, safe plastic equipment on a bed of rubber mulch. It was sterile and cheerful. The kids loved it. I'm in my mid-30s now. I have a daughter of my own. We go to the new, safe park sometimes. She loves the swings. I sit on the bench and watch her, and my eyes are always drawn to the spot where the slide used to be. It's just a patch of grass now. But sometimes, on a particularly cold and quiet winter evening, if I walk past the park, I swear I can still feel it. A pocket of deep, unnatural cold hanging in the air. And if I listen very, very closely beneath the sigh of the wind, I can hear it. The faint, rasping echo of a breath that should have stopped 50 years ago. The slide is gone, but the whisper remains. My name is Sarah Evans, and if you were to ask me what color fear is, I wouldn't say black. I'd say white. The stark, blinding white of a summer dress glowing in the twilight. The pale, featureless white of a face that should have held a smile. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just a ghost story. It's a story about responsibility, about the weight of a simple, kind gesture that led me into a nightmare, and about a truth that was buried for 2 decades in the quiet, well-kept soil of my hometown. It was the autumn of 2001. I was 11 years old, caught in that awkward space between childhood and adolescence. Too old for dolls, but too young for boys to be anything other than gross. My world was my bike, my best friend Megan, and the sprawling, oak-shaded expanse of Crestwood Park. The park was an old one, with towering, ancient trees that canopied the paths and cast deep, shifting shadows in the late afternoon light. The playground equipment was the same metal and wood kind Jake described, but ours had a particular centerpiece. A set of 4 heavy belt seat swings that hung from a massive A-frame iron bar. The swing on the far left was my favorite. It had the smoothest arc, the least squeak in its chains. But that autumn, I found it perpetually occupied. It started in September. The days were getting shorter, and the evening air had a crisp, smoky bite that promised Halloween was coming. My mom had a new rule: be home by dusk. No exceptions. I was pushing that rule to its limit, soaking up the last moments of daylight. That's when I first saw her. She was on my swing, the one on the end. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, swinging with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. She wore a simple, old-fashioned white dress that looked too thin for the cool weather, and white socks with little lace frills that were pulled up to her shins. Her black patent leather shoes pointed towards the ground as she swung. Her hair was pale, almost silver, and it swayed with her motion. I remember feeling a flicker of annoyance. That was my swing. But she was so small, so absorbed in her solitary game that I couldn't bring myself to tell her to move. I took the swing next to her and began pumping my legs, trying to go higher, faster, as if to prove my seniority. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on some distant point between the gnarled roots of the oak trees. She never smiled. She never frowned. Her face was a perfect placid mask. We swung in parallel silence for 10 minutes, the only sounds the creak of the chains and the rustle of dead leaves skittering across the path. This became our unspoken ritual. 3, Sometimes 4 evenings a week, she would be there, always on the left swing, always swinging at that same steady metronome pace. I never saw her arrive. I never saw her leave. I'd look away to watch a squirrel or to see how high I could go, and when I looked back, the swing would be empty, moving gently back and forth as if she'd just jumped off. But I never saw her jump. The other kids didn't seem to notice her. They'd run and shriek and play tag, giving the swing set a wide berth. I asked Megan about her once. "What little girl?" she'd said, squinting towards the empty swing. "I don't see anyone, Sarah. You're being weird." But I saw her, clear as day, and a slow, cold curiosity began to brew inside me, overpowering my initial unease. Who was she? Why was she always alone? Where were her parents? The incident that changed everything happened on a Thursday. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. The park was nearly empty. My mom's dusk deadline was pressing down on me. I knew I had to go home. But the little girl was still there, swinging, her white dress a luminous beacon in the gathering gloom. A surge of responsibility, of 11-year-old maturity washed over me. She was too little to be out here alone. It was getting dark. She must be lost. Someone needed to help her. I dragged my feet in the dirt, bringing my swing to a jerky halt. The girl continued her rhythmic motion, unaffected. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet park. She didn't respond. "It's getting late," I continued, trying to sound authoritative like my mom. "You should probably go home. Your mom is probably looking for you." That's when she stopped. It wasn't a natural stop. 1 second she was in motion, a fluid arc of white, and the next, she was perfectly, unnaturally still. The swing didn't even sway. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the entire universe. Slowly, with a stiffness that was utterly alien to a child's body, she turned her head to look at me. The last of the twilight caught her face. I have replayed this moment 10,000 times in my mind, and the horror has never diminished. She had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Where her features should have been was just smooth, unbroken skin, the color of old porcelain. It was blank, like a doll's head before it's painted. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I was pinned in place by that smooth, empty gaze. Then she raised one arm. Not a wave. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Her hand, small and pale, extended a single index finger, and she pointed. Not at me, not past me. She pointed directly at the ground beneath her swing. The spell broke. A sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped my throat. I scrambled backward off my swing, falling onto the hard ground. I didn't get up. I crawled, my knees scraping on the gravel, until I found my footing, and then I ran. I ran as I had never run before, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I didn't look back. I burst through my front door, pale and trembling, my clothes dirty from my fall. My mom was in the kitchen. "Sarah, good grief, what's wrong with you? You're a mess, and you're late." "There was a girl," I panted, tears starting to stream down my face, "at the park. Her face, she had no face." My mom sighed, the familiar sigh of a parent dealing with an over-imaginative child. She put a hand on my forehead. "No fever. You've probably just been reading too many of those scary books. Go wash up for dinner." I was inconsolable. I couldn't eat. I spent the night curled in my bed, the image of that smooth, blank face seared onto the back of my eyelids. My parents dismissed it as a nightmare, a waking dream brought on by the shadows and the time of day. The next day, I refused to go to school. I refused to leave my room. The world outside my window, the familiar street, the towering oaks of the park, all of it now seemed menacing. It was around noon when the phone rang. My mom answered it in the kitchen. I heard her voice, low and serious. "Oh my God. When? Are they sure? That's just terrible." She hung up and came into my room, her face ashen. She sat on the edge of my bed. "Sarah," she began, her voice gentle but strained. "You know how you were upset about that girl in the park last night?" I nodded, my throat tight. "The police. They were at the park this morning, doing some kind of survey, I think." She took a deep breath. "They found something under the swings." I felt the world shrink to a tiny, cold point. "They found remains, honey. A child's skeleton. They think it's been there for a very, very long time." The room spun. The little girl in the white dress, the pointing finger aimed directly at the ground. She wasn't lost. She was showing me where she was. The following days were a blur of police tape, news vans, and a pervasive sense of shock in our small town. Crestwood Park was closed. The swings, the slide, the fort, all of it was cordoned off as a crime scene. The story dominated the local news. Her name was Eleanor Ellie Brennan. She had been 7 years old when she vanished on her way home from a picnic in Crestwood Park in the summer of 1979. The case had gone cold, a sad, faded file in the police archives. She had last been seen wearing a white sundress with lace-trimmed socks and black patent leather shoes. The description was exact. The dress, the socks, the shoes. It was her. The official theory was that she had been abducted and murdered, her body hastily buried in the one place no one would think to look for a missing child, a popular playground. The killer had buried her under the soft, sandy soil beneath the swing set, and for over 20 years, thousands of children had run and played and swung right over her lonely grave. Her case had been forgotten, but she hadn't. She had stayed there, on her swing, waiting. I became a minor temporary celebrity. The little girl who had sensed something. The police interviewed me gently but thoroughly. I told them everything, about the girl in the white dress, about our silent evenings, about the faceless horror and the pointing finger. The lead detective, a kind-faced man with tired eyes, didn't dismiss me. He just nodded slowly, taking notes. "Children are often more perceptive than we give them credit for, Sarah," he'd said. "Thank you. You helped bring Ellie home." They never caught the killer. The case remains open, but cold once more. Ellie Brennan was given a proper burial, a small headstone in a cemetery on the outskirts of town. Her family, who had lived with the agonizing mystery for 2 decades, finally had closure, however painful. The park reopened eventually. They tore out the old swing set and put in a new, brightly colored one in a different location. They put a small, discreet plaque on a bench nearby, dedicated to the memory of Eleanor Brennan. I never swung on that new set. I rarely went back to the park at all. The incident had scarred me, but in a strange way it had also marked me. I had been chosen, not by a monster, but by a lost little girl who was just tired of being alone in the dark. She wasn't a malicious spirit. She was a sad one, a trapped one. And she had used the last of her energy, her lingering presence, to ask for help from the only person who seemed to see her. I'm a social worker now. I work with children. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe it's because I know what it's like to be a child who isn't believed, who carries a secret too heavy for their shoulders. I know that the world is not always a safe playground. Sometimes the shadows hold real tragedies. And sometimes the quiet, lonely children, whether they are living or dead, just need someone to finally see them and ask, "Are you lost?" I'm in my 30s now, and I have a family of my own. We live in a different town. But sometimes on a cool autumn evening when the light is just right, I'll be driving and I'll pass a park. And my eyes will instinctively scan the swing sets. I never see a little girl in a white dress. But I always feel a profound, aching sense of sadness, and a hope that wherever Ellie is, she's finally found a swing that takes her somewhere bright and happy, and that she's no longer alone. My name is Ben Carter, and I want to talk to you about balance. Not the physical kind, the kind you learn on a bicycle. I mean, the cosmic kind. The universe, I learned at the age of 10, operates on a principle of equilibrium. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction. For every moment of joy, a corresponding moment of sorrow. Most of us live our lives without ever feeling this scale, this great invisible teeter-totter of fate. But in the summer of 2008, in the forgotten corner of Mill Creek Park, my best friend David and I found the fulcrum. It was an old seesaw. Not the bright plastic, safety-engineered kind you see now. This was a relic. 2 long, splintery wooden planks, bleached gray by decades of sun, joined by a massive, rusted iron bolt that served as its pivot. It sat in a patch of struggling clover, away from the shiny new jungle gym and the rubber-matted swings. It was our spot. David and I were masters of its physics. We knew how to launch each other, how to stall in the air, how to create a rhythm that felt like flying. The change was gradual. It started one Tuesday afternoon. David, who was a good 20 pounds heavier than me, got on one end. I took the other, ready for my feet to immediately leave the ground. But they didn't. The seesaw settled into a perfect, unwavering horizontal line. We were suspended in midair, perfectly balanced. "Hey, stop messing around," David said, grinning. "Push off." "I'm not doing anything," I protested, pushing down with all my weight. The plank didn't budge a millimeter. It was as if it were locked in place. David tried rocking, then pumping his legs. Nothing. The seesaw remained rigid, a dead, straight line against the blue sky. We finally had to shuffle to the center like awkward crabs to get off. We laughed it off. A weird fluke, a stuck bolt. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that. No matter who got on, no matter their weight difference, the seesaw would find its perfect, impossible equilibrium. 2 kids of equal weight. It balanced. A parent and a toddler. It balanced. We even tried piling 3 kids on one end against one on the other. The seesaw groaned under the strain, but it held its horizontal position, defying the very laws it was built to demonstrate. It became a neighborhood curiosity, a weird landmark. But for David and me, it was our secret throne. We would sit on that balanced plank, our feet dangling in the air, and feel like kings of a world that had momentarily forgotten about gravity. Then the ripples started. The first one was small. David aced a math test he was sure he'd failed. He was ecstatic. That same afternoon, he fell off his skateboard and broke his wrist. A promotion for his dad at the factory was announced, followed the next week by a fender bender that totaled their second car. A surprise check from a relative arrived in the mail for my family. Our water heater burst 2 days later. Coincidences. That's what our parents called them. The random chaos of life. But David and I started keeping a mental ledger. We'd sit on our motionless seesaw and compare notes. "My grandma sent me $10, he'd say, his cast looking starkly white against his tanned arm. "I lost my favorite baseball glove," I'd reply. The ledger always balanced. The universe was settling its accounts, and it seemed to be using the seesaw as its office. The true horror, the moment it stopped being a game, was with the Millers. They were an elderly couple who lived next door to the park. Mr. Miller had been fighting cancer for years. One sunny afternoon, his daughter came running into the park, tears streaming down her face. He was in remission. The scans were clear. It was a miracle. The whole neighborhood celebrated. David and I were on the seesaw when we heard the news. We looked at each other, and for the first time there was no curiosity in our eyes, only dread. We knew the other shoe was going to drop. The scale had been tipped too far in one direction. It took 3 days. Mrs. Miller, healthy as a horse, took her dog for a walk. A hit and run. She was killed instantly. The miracle had been balanced by a tragedy. The joy erased by an equal and opposite measure of grief. We stopped going to the seesaw after that. It was no longer a fascinating oddity. It was a cursed thing, a lever that reached into the lives of anyone who touched it and enforced a brutal mathematical justice. We saw its influence everywhere. A kid would find a $20 bill, then get a vicious stomach flu. A family would have a perfect sunny vacation, then return to find their house had been robbed. We tried to tell someone. My dad just ruffled my hair. That's life, kiddo. Peaks and valleys. But we knew. We had found the valley. We had found the machine that created the valleys. Our final act was one of desperate, childish defiance. We couldn't destroy the seesaw. It was anchored in concrete. So we decided to break its influence. We went to the park at dawn, the grass wet with dew. We carried a heavy 5-pound sack of rock salt from my garage. The universe wants balance, right? David said, his jaw set. Let's give it something to balance. We didn't get on the seesaw. We stood beside it. Together we heaved the bag of salt onto one end. The plank didn't move. It held the weight, still perfectly horizontal, as if the bag were weightless. It was waiting for a counterweight. It was waiting for us to get on the other side and complete the circuit. We looked at each other, a shared understanding passing between us. This wasn't a mechanical flaw. This was sentient. This was hungry. We ran. We left the bag of salt sitting there on the plank, and we never went back. A month later, the city council, spurred by a few complaints about unsafe equipment, sent a crew to renovate Mill Creek Park. They tore out the old seesaw. I watched from a distance as the workmen struggled with the central bolt, finally taking a blowtorch to it. When they pried the wooden planks from the rusted iron, a sound came out, a long, low, metallic sigh that made one of the workmen drop his wrench. They poured fresh concrete and installed a new, bright blue plastic seesaw with soft rubber handles. Kids use it all the time now. It goes up and down like a seesaw should. David and I never spoke about it again. It was an unspoken pact. We had stumbled upon a fundamental law of reality, and in our terror we had turned away. But the knowledge never left me. I became an actuary. I work for an insurance company. I calculate risk. I spend my days immersed in probability, in statistics, in the cold, hard math of catastrophe. I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that the universe does keep a ledger. The averages always work out. The numbers always balance in the end. Sometimes, when I'm calculating the premium for a client who has just won the lottery, or pricing a policy for a family about to embark on a dream vacation, I pause. I think about that old, grey seesaw. I think about the bag of salt sitting on one end, waiting for a weight that never came. And I wonder if, somewhere in the cosmos, the other end of that plank finally slammed into the earth, and what terrible, beautiful, perfectly balanced event had to occur somewhere in the world to finally settle its account. The playground was updated, but the principle remains. The universe always balances its books. My name is Mia Rodriguez, and I want to talk to you about mirrors. Not the kind that hang on your wall, clear and honest. I mean the accidental ones. The ones that appear in a rain puddle, a dark window, or the curved bronze bowl of an old drinking fountain. I was 9 years old when I learned that a reflection isn't just light bouncing back at you. Sometimes it's a window, and sometimes the thing on the other side is waiting for its chance to climb through. It was the spring of 2007. My sanctuary was not the playground itself, but a quiet, cobblestone courtyard at its edge, a forgotten corner of Ravenswood Park. The centerpiece of this courtyard was a drinking fountain, and it was unlike any other I'd ever seen. It was an antique, a relic from a time when public works were built with artistry. It was a single bronze figure of a cherub, its wings folded behind it, holding a large scalloped shell that served as the basin. The water spout was a lion's head, green with verdigris, and the handle was a heavy iron lever you had to press with your whole body weight. But the most remarkable thing was the bowl itself. Made of hand-beaten bronze, it was polished to a soft, warm glow by decades of hands and backsides. When the water was still, it became a perfect, if distorted, mirror. Your reflection would stare back at you, your face a wobbly, liquid oval, your eyes wide and dark. I was thirsty after an intense game of tag. I left my friends by the swings and walked to the courtyard, the cobblestones cool through the thin soles of my sneakers. The place was deserted, wrapped in a quiet, late-afternoon hush. I approached the cherub, its metal warm from the sun. I pressed the heavy lever. With a groan and a gurgle, a cold, clear arc of water splashed into the shell. I leaned over, cupping my hands to drink. The water was shockingly cold and tasted strongly of metal, a taste I didn't mind. It tasted ancient. When I was done, I released the lever. The water settled, the ripples smoothing out until the surface was like dark, liquid glass. I leaned in, not to drink, but to look. My reflection coalesced in the curved bronze, my own face, my dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, my favorite blue t-shirt. It was me, but warped, my features subtly stretched and softened by the metal. I made a face. My reflection made a face back. I stuck out my tongue. It stuck out its tongue. Then, it didn't. I froze, my own tongue still out. My reflection's face had gone smooth, blank. The playful expression had vanished, replaced by a placid, vacant stare. And then, it began to change. The eyes, which should have been brown like mine, darkened until they were two pools of solid, oily black. No whites, no pupils, just darkness. And the mouth, my mouth, began to stretch. It pulled up at the corners, widening into a grin. But it wasn't my grin. It was a huge, nasty, predatory smile, filled with too many teeth that were just a little too sharp. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated malice. I jerked backward, my heart seizing in my chest. A small, terrified sound escaped my lips. The reflection didn't mirror my movement. It held its position, that horrific smile fixed on its face, those black pits staring into me. It was no longer a reflection. It was a resident. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the park, my breath ragged, not stopping until I crashed into my older brother, Luis, who was chatting with his friends. "Whoa, Mia, what's your problem?" he said, steadying me. "The fountain," I gasped, tears starting to well in my eyes. "There's something in the fountain. It looked at me." Luis sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a 14-year-old. "It's your reflection, dummy. You probably just saw a bug or something." "It wasn't. Its eyes were black. It smiled." My brother's friends chuckled. Luis rolled his eyes. "Come on, I'll show you." He dragged me, protesting, back to the courtyard. The fountain stood, silent and innocent. The water in the bowl was still. I hung back, my whole body trembling. "See?" Luis said, marching up to it. He leaned over the basin. "Look, nothing there." He peered in. Just me being super handsome. He made a goofy face at his reflection. I inched closer, my fear warring with a desperate need for validation. I looked over his shoulder into the bronze bowl. His reflection stared back. It was him, perfectly normal. It made the same goofy face he did. "See?" he said, straightening up. "You let your imagination run wild. Now stop being a baby." He walked away, leaving me alone in the courtyard. I stood there staring at the cherub's benign, smiling face. Had I imagined it? The heat, the running. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a momentary dizziness. Cautiously, I took a step forward, then another. I leaned over, just enough to catch a glimpse in the bowl. My own face looked back. Brown eyes, normal mouth. It was me. Relief, warm and dizzying, washed over me. It had been my imagination. I let out a shaky laugh. And then, my reflection winked. It was a slow, deliberate, knowing wink. And as it did, the corner of its mouth twitched. the ghost of that terrible, hungry smile flickering for just an instant before the image returned to normal. I didn't scream this time. The terror was too deep, too cold for that. I just turned and walked away, my legs feeling like wood. I never drank from that fountain again. I avoided the courtyard altogether. The nightmares started that night. In them, I was trapped in the bronze world of the fountain bowl, looking out. And my reflection was on the outside, wearing my skin, living my life, smiling that awful smile at my parents, at my brother, while I pounded silently on the curved metal wall, screaming without making a sound. I told my parents about the nightmares, but not their source. They were just bad dreams. The fountain was my secret, my personal haunting. I'd sometimes see other kids drinking from it and I'd want to scream a warning, but I never did. Who would believe me? The incident that finally broke the haunting's hold on me happened a year later. The city, as part of a park renovation project, decided to remove the old fountain. They said it was inefficient and a lead hazard. I watched from a distance as a workman, with difficulty, unscrewed the lion's head spout. Then, he started prying the bronze shell from the cherub's hands. As the shell came loose, something fell out from the hollow space behind it, landing on the cobblestones with a clatter. It wasn't a tool or a piece of pipe. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. The workman picked it up, curious. He managed to pry it open. His face went pale. He called his foreman over. Later, my mum heard the gossip from a friend on the city council. Inside the locket was a tiny, faded photograph of a young girl from the early 1900s, and a single long, dark hair. The girl was a known figure in local history, a poor immigrant child named Anya, who had worked as a scullery maid for the wealthy family that once owned the land. She had drowned, mysteriously, in the family's ornamental pond, the very pond that had been filled in to create Ravenswood Park. The fountain had been built directly over the spot. They said her death was an accident, but the locket, hidden away, suggested something darker. A secret. A crime. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my soul, that it was her, Anya, trapped not in the water, but in the reflection of the water. A soul so full of bitterness and loss, it had fused with the metal, its malice seeping into the mirror-like surface. She wasn't trying to be me. She was trying to replace me, to have a life, any life, after hers had been so cruelly taken. The fountain was carted away, likely melted down for scrap. The courtyard was paved over, turned into a seating area. The hauntings stopped. The nightmares faded. But I am forever changed. I am cautious around reflections. I never look too long into a dark window at night. I avoid still puddles after a rain, because I know that the line between our world and the next is sometimes as thin as a film of water on beaten bronze. And some reflections don't just show you what is, they show you what is waiting, and they are always, always hungry for the light. My name is David Chen, and I want to talk to you about the rules of a game. Not the official rules written down or agreed upon, but the deep, unspoken ones. The ones that govern the shadows between the trees, the quality of silence in a good hiding spot, the shared understanding that when the seeker calls, "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free," the game is over, and everyone is safe. In the autumn of 2009, I learned that there are other players who don't follow our rules. They play by a different set, and their version of Seek has no free. It was the golden hour at Maple Grove Park, that magical time before dusk, when the world is dipped in honey. The park was a sprawling wonderland of oak and maple trees, with a dense thicket of rhododendrons we called the jungle at its far edge. I was 11, and the undisputed champion of hide-and-seek. My best friend Leo, the same Leo from the chalk drawing story, was it. He stood at the old oak, the base, his face pressed against the rough bark, counting loudly to 50. 48, 49, 50. Ready or not, here I come. His voice echoed, And then the park fell into that breathless, anticipatory quiet that is the true heart of the game. I didn't run for the obvious spots. I went deep. I slipped behind the jungle, where the maintenance shed, a windowless corrugated metal box, was shoved against the back fence. There was a narrow gap, maybe 8 inches wide, between the shed's warm metal wall and the chain-link fence. It was a tight, dark, and perfect squeeze. I wormed my way into the gap, my back against the sun-warmed shed, my face inches from the cold fence. It was a coffin of space, filled with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The light from the dying day was a thin, golden line far above me. I was completely concealed. I held my breath, listening. I could hear Leo's footsteps crunching on the gravel path, his voice calling out taunts. "I see you, David." "Just kidding." His voice grew fainter as he moved toward the playground. I smiled in the darkness. I had won again. Then, a new sound. Not Leo. It started as a soft, dry rustle, like a large bag of dead leaves being shifted. It was coming from the darkness right beside me. I froze, my smile vanishing. A rat. A possum. I tried to press myself flatter against the shed. The rustling stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. It was a listening silence. And then, from the impenetrable blackness not 2 feet from my face, a voice spoke. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stones grinding together in a deep well. It had no warmth, no breath behind it. It was a voice made of dust and forgotten things. "Here I come." It wasn't mimicking Leo. It was speaking in time with him. A half-second after Leo's distant, playful call faded, this thing, in the dark with me, whispered its own version. A dark echo, a promise, terror, cold and absolute, locked my joints. This wasn't part of the game. This was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred rules. Then I felt it. A pressure on my ankle. Something cold and bony, like a bundle of dry twigs, closed around my leg. The grip was impossibly strong. It wasn't squeezing, not yet. It was just holding, claiming. A sound finally broke from my throat, a strangled whimper. The thing in the dark tightened its grip, and a jolt of pain shot up my leg. It was a warning. I thrashed. I didn't care about the game anymore, about winning. I was fighting for my life. I kicked out with my free leg, my sneaker connecting with something hard and unyielding. I twisted, scraping my back raw against the corrugated metal, and tore myself free from that skeletal grip. I exploded from the gap behind the shed, stumbling into the open. I didn't look back. I ran, my injured ankle screaming with every step, a sob of pure animal fear tearing from my lungs. I ran past a startled Leo, past the swings, and didn't stop until I collapsed on my own front porch. My parents were alarmed by my state. The torn clothes, the raw, bleeding scrape on my back, the terror in my eyes. I babbled about a man, a thing, in the dark by the shed. They called the police. 2 officers came. They searched the area behind the shed with powerful flashlights. They found nothing. No one. Just the narrow gap I described and my own footprints in the soft earth. "There's no one here, son," one officer said, his voice kind but firm. "You probably just got spooked, got yourself wedged in there and panicked. It happens." They left. My parents accepted the explanation. A panic attack, a claustrophobic episode. But Leo knew. He had seen my face. He found me the next day at school, his usual bravado gone. "The others," he said, his voice low. "They saw it too." "What?" "After you ran," he whispered. "I was standing there and I saw it, just for a second. A tall, thin shape standing behind the shed. It was just watching you run. And then it was like it melted back into the shadows." He shuddered. They all saw it. Everyone who was still there. The story spread through our grade, not as a joke, but as a confirmed, shared terror. We had a name for it now, born from that dry, rasping whisper. We called it the Echo. We never played hide-and-seek in that park again. The game was ruined for all of us. We had learned the most terrifying rule of all. When you hide, you are not just hiding from the seeker. You are announcing your location, your vulnerability, to everything else that is listening. You are ringing a dinner bell in the dark. The park is still there. The shed is still there. Sometimes when I drive past it at dusk, I see kids playing. My heart clenches. I want to roll down my window and shout, "Stop! Don't you know the rules?" But I don't. Because the final, most horrifying lesson the Echo taught me is this. In every game, there are official players. And then there are the ones who join without being invited. They don't play to find you. They play to keep you. And their game never, ever ends. My name is Noah Williams, and I want to talk to you about the architecture of loneliness. Not the kind you feel in an empty room, but the kind that can build a world around you. A world so real and vivid that the lines between what is and what was begin to blur. In the autumn of 2003, I was 10 years old and the loneliest boy on Hemlock Street. My family had just moved to the sleepy town of Oak Haven, and I was adrift, a stranger in a sea of established friendships and whispered inside jokes. My sanctuary was a dilapidated treehouse at the end of our street, a forgotten fortress nestled in the gnarled arms of an ancient oak. It was there I met Thomas, the boy who taught me that the best friends are sometimes those that time itself has forgotten. The treehouse was a local legend, though most of the kids my age considered it haunted and avoided it. It was a rugged, beautiful structure, built from rough-hewn planks gone silver with age, with a shingled roof thick with moss. A rope ladder, its fibers frayed and soft, was the only way up. Inside it smelled of damp wood, old leaves, and a profound, peaceful silence. It became my kingdom, my library, my escape. The first time I saw him, I thought he was a real boy. I was sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor, reading a comic book, when a face appeared in the square opening that served as a window. He was pale, with hair the color of wheat, and eyes that were a startling clear blue. He wore clothes that struck me as odd, khaki shorts that ended just above the knee, a white button-up shirt, and suspenders. They looked like something from an old movie. "Hello," he said. His voice was soft but not a whisper. It had a clear, bell-like quality. "I'm Thomas. Do you want to play?" I was so starved for companionship that I didn't question his sudden appearance or his strange clothes. "Sure," I said, my heart lifting for the first time in weeks. "I'm Noah." And just like that, I had a friend. Thomas was the perfect playmate. He knew every secret of the treehouse. He showed me a loose floorboard under which we could hide treasures, a shiny rock, a bird's feather, a marble. He taught me a game involving acorns and a series of grooves worn into one of the main beams. We would play for hours, and the time would slip away like water through my fingers. He was quiet, thoughtful, and he listened to me in a way no one else ever had. He made me feel interesting. He never talked about school, or his family, or anything beyond the confines of the treehouse and the small, overgrown yard that surrounded the oak tree. When I asked where he lived, he simply pointed a pale finger towards the west. "In the old house," he'd say. I looked. There was no house to the west, just a vacant, overgrown lot, choked with weeds and surrounded by a rusted wrought-iron fence. The afternoons with Thomas became the anchor of my life. I'd rush through my homework, wolf down my snacks, and run to the treehouse. He was always there, waiting. My parents were just relieved to see me happy. "Noah's found a little friend," my mom would say to my dad, "a boy named Thomas." They never saw him, of course. He never came to the door, but that didn't seem strange to them. I was a kid with an imagination. It was healthy. The end began on a day in late October. The air was crisp, and the leaves were a blazing tapestry of red and gold. Thomas and I were playing our acorn game. I was winning for once. I was so happy, so content in this little world we had built. "Thomas," I said, looking up from the game board groove, "you're my best friend." He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "You're my best friend too, Noah. My mom is making hot chocolate. Do you want to come to my house?" He shook his head, his smile fading. "I can't." "Why not?" He looked out the window towards the vacant lot. "I have to go home soon. It's almost time." "Time for what?" I pressed, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up. "I have to go now, Noah. Goodbye." It was the first time he'd ever said goodbye. It was always, "See you tomorrow." I stood up too, confused. "I'll see you tomorrow, right?" He was already climbing down the rope ladder with an agility I'd never seen in him before. I scrambled after him. "Thomas, wait!" By the time my feet hit the ground, he was gone. Not running down the street, not hiding behind a tree, just gone. The vacant lot was silent and still. The only sound was the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. A profound, aching loneliness, deeper than any I had felt before we met, settled over me. I ran home, tears stinging my eyes. I burst into the kitchen where my grandmother was visiting, shelling peas at the table. "Grandma," I sobbed, the story tumbling out of me. "My friend Thomas, he's gone. He lives in the old house, but there is no old house." My grandmother stopped shelling peas. Her face, usually warm and crinkled with smiles, had gone very still. "Thomas," she said, her voice low and careful. "What did he look like, Noah?" I described him. The wheat-colored hair, the blue eyes, the suspenders, the khaki shorts. My grandmother slowly put down the pea pod in her hand. She stood up, took my hand, and led me to the living room. On the mantelpiece was an old, sepia-toned photograph in a tarnished silver frame. It was a class picture from Oakhaven Elementary, dated 1923. Rows of serious-faced children in old-fashioned clothes stared out at the camera. "Point to him, Noah," my grandmother whispered, her grip on my hand tightening. I didn't have to search. I saw him immediately. In the back row, third from the left. My friend Thomas. His clear eyes looked out from the photograph, his face solemn, forever frozen at age 10. My legs gave way. I sat down hard on the rug. "He was a friend of my older brother," my grandmother said, her voice trembling. "He lived in the big Victorian house that used to be on that vacant lot. A sweet boy. He died in the influenza epidemic the winter after that photo was taken. He was always a lonely child. He loved that treehouse. His father built it for him. I didn't go back to the treehouse after that." The magic was gone, replaced by a sorrow so vast I couldn't contain it. I hadn't found an imaginary friend. I had found a ghost. A lonely, kind spirit who had reached across 8 decades to find a companion, to play one last game, to have a best friend. The treehouse was torn down a year later when the vacant lot was finally sold. I watched from my window as the old oak was stripped of its fortress, the planks crashing to the ground. I didn't feel sad. I felt a sense of release. I'm a historian now. I specialize in early 20th century local history. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe it's because I know that the past isn't just names and dates in a book. It's full of people. People who laughed, who loved, who got scared, and who got lonely. Sometimes the echoes of their lives are so strong they can build a bridge to the present, looking for a connection, a game, a friend. I never saw Thomas again. But sometimes when I'm walking through an old part of town and I see a child playing alone, I wonder if they too have a friend that no one else can see. A friend from a time long past who just wants someone to share the quiet, sun-dappled hours of a perfect, endless afternoon. My name is Lily Jiang, and I want to talk to you about the weight of a thought. Most people think thoughts are weightless, invisible things that vanish as soon as they're formed. But in the summer of 2011, my little sister Maya and I learned that a thought can be heavy. A joke, spoken in a moment of childish whimsy, can have mass and consequence. It can press down on the world in ways you never imagined, inviting forces that operate on a logic far older and more terrifying than gravity. It was a blisteringly hot afternoon at Riverview Park. The air shimmered over the asphalt paths, and the metal slides were baking ovens. My sister Maya, who was 7, and I, at the wise old age of 12, had exhausted the swings and were now on the seesaw. It was an old, splintery thing, a long plank of wood balanced on a central metal fulcrum, its red paint faded to a sickly pink by years of sun. We were going up and down in a lazy, rhythmic motion, the familiar creak of the wood, a soundtrack to our boredom. Maya was on the lower end, her feet kicking up puffs of dust. "This is boring," she announced, her voice echoing in the thick, hot air. "It's a seesaw, Maya. It goes up and down." "That's what it does," I replied, my tone laced with preteen exasperation. She was quiet for a moment, then a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. She loved ghost stories, the spookier the better. "What if a ghost sat in the middle?" she said, giggling. "Then we'd really go flying." I rolled my eyes, but played along. It was too hot for a real argument. "Yeah, sure, a big fat ghost. He'd probably get stuck." The words left my mouth, a simple, silly joke, a puff of air, nothing more. And that's when the seesaw stopped. It wasn't a gradual slowdown, it was an instantaneous, absolute cessation of motion. 1 second we were in a gentle up and down arc, and the next we were frozen. The plank was perfectly, impossibly horizontal. Maya was suspended a foot off the ground, and I was up in the air, my legs dangling. The creaking stopped. The world went silent. "Hey, stop it, Lily!" Maya yelled, her giggles turning to confusion. She thought I was bracing with my legs. "I'm not doing anything," I protested, my voice sharp with a sudden, inexplicable dread. I pushed down with all my weight. The plank didn't budge. It was as solid as if it were set in concrete. I looked at Maya. Her face was a mirror of my own confusion, now tinged with fear. That's when we saw it. In the dead center of the plank, right over the metal fulcrum, the wood. Dented. It wasn't a crack or a splinter. It was a smooth, deep impression, as if an invisible, incredibly heavy ball had been placed there. The worn pink paint compressed without breaking. The depression was about the size of a large dinner plate. Maya let out a small, choked whimper. My own breath froze in my lungs. The seesaw began to move again, but it wasn't us moving it. An unseen force was operating the plank. It started to go up and down again, but the rhythm was all wrong. It was slow, deliberate, and powerful. The motion was no longer centered on us. The fulcrum had shifted to that new, invisible center of gravity. We were just passengers, baggage, up. A slow, groaning creak from the wood. Down. A jarring thud as my end hit the ground. Up. Maya's terrified face rose into view, her eyes wide with panic. Down. My stomach lurched as I was lifted again. We were screaming now, both of us. Raw, primal screams of terror that tore through the quiet park. We were trapped on a childhood toy that had been hijacked by an unseen, impossible weight. The joke was no longer funny. The ghost had accepted its invitation and taken a seat. The movement was relentless, a slow-motion nightmare. I clutched the handles, my knuckles white, sure I was going to be flung into the sky. Maya was sobbing, her small hands gripping the wood for dear life. The salvation came in the form of my father, who had been reading a book on a bench 50 yards away. He heard our screams. He was sprinting across the grass before our second cycle was complete. "Girls, what's wrong?" He didn't wait for an answer. He saw our faces, the sheer unadulterated terror. He ran to the center of the seesaw, and without a second's hesitation, he grabbed Maya, pulling her from her seat. The second her weight left the plank, the motion stopped instantly. The plank slammed down on my end, the impact jarring my teeth. I scrambled off, falling into the dust, sobbing. My dad had Maya in his arms, and he was looking around, his face a mask of fury and confusion. Who did that? Was it some older kids? Did they jump on it? But there was no one. The park was empty. The only evidence was the deep, smooth dent in the center of the seesaw, a depression that hadn't been there 10 minutes before. We couldn't explain it. We tried, through our tears and hiccuping sobs, to tell him about the ghost joke. He listened, his anger fading into a concerned puzzlement. He checked the seesaw, pushing on the dent, testing the fulcrum. It was solid. He had no explanation. We never went on that seesaw again. We gave it a wide berth, treating it like a venomous snake. A week later, the park maintenance crew came and replaced the entire plank. The new one was a fresh, bright yellow, but to me it would always be tainted. I'm a theoretical physicist now. I study dark matter, the invisible substance that makes up most of the mass in the universe, that exerts a gravitational pull but cannot be seen or touched. My colleagues talk about WIMPs and axions, about gravitational lensing and cosmic background radiation. And I think about that day. I think about the weight of a thought. I don't believe we summoned a ghost in the traditional sense. I believe we, in our childish innocence and with the peculiar focus that play provides, gave form to something else. We gave a name and a location to a force that is always present, but usually diffuse. We pointed to an empty space and said, "You are here," and the universe in its vast, indifferent way agreed. We created a temporary locus for something that has no business in a children's park, a focal point for a pressure that should exist only between galaxies. The new seesaw is still there. Children play on it every day, up and down, laughing. They have no idea that the space in the middle of that plank is not entirely empty, that a thought, once given weight, never truly becomes weightless again, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is to point to an empty space and give it a name. The playgrounds in these stories still stand. The swings still creak in the wind, the slides still gleam in the sun, and the sandboxes still wait for the next castle to be built. The children who experienced these horrors are adults now, but the memories remain, as vivid and unsettling as the day they happened. They found their uniforms torn and bloodied, but they never found what they saw that day on the playground. And God help them. They pray they never do. These are their testimonies. This is the truth they carry. If you have a story you're brave enough to share, we invite you to tell us in the comments below. And if you want to hear more true accounts from the shadows of everyday life, make sure you're subscribed to Night Souls with notifications on. Thank you for listening. Stay curious but stay safe. Good night.